and thank you so much for joining us for our second webinar in our career series. We're going to be going over a ton of information, obviously focusing on resumes and cover letters, but there are going to be other little bits of diamonds in there talking about workforce trends, ATS systems, and much more. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our resident career expert here at Tutor.com, Rachel Eckman. She's joined us for many webinars over the past couple of years, so we are in great hands, and I'll just pass it on over to you.
Thank you so much, Maxine. And again, thank you all for joining us today live or for watching the recording later on. And as Maxine already told you, today is the second in our three-part career series. And if you missed last week's presentation on career transitions, not to worry, you can find it on our YouTube channel. And Maxine will give you more information again about all of that later on today. Today, we are going to talk all about resumes and cover letters, but let's start off by digging a little bit into what's going on in today's job market. This is actually a really exciting time to be in the job market. Nick Bunker, who is the head of economic research for the Indeed Hiring Lab, recently referred to this job market as a juggernaut. There are historic record-breaking numbers in terms of resignations and career transitions, the lowest unemployment rates since 1953, and historically rapid wage growth. Not to mention, there are more generations in today's workforce than ever before. And perhaps the most significant change in the job market today is the growing volume of permanently remote positions. Remote work, which existed prior to the pandemic but wasn't as prevalent or talked about, has become one of the biggest shifts in employment trends in decades. Of course, the largest impact on the workforce itself is the availability of potential candidates for employers. Instead of searching for qualified candidates within commuting distance of their organization, businesses can now search for them all over the country or even the world. And the flip side for you as the job seeker is that you can now find your perfect job, even if it's thousands of miles away. There's really just so much going on in today's job market. There's so much potential for success and for career progression, whether you are unemployed and seeking employment, employed and seeking a better opportunity, making a career transition, or some combination. The possibilities are endless right now. Unemployment rates vary to some extent from state to state, but the national unemployment rate currently is about 3.6%. We actually were at a record low in January at 3.4%. There are approximately 5.9 million unemployed people right now and just under 11 million jobs, which sounds a little odd, right? Because if there are twice as many job openings as there are job seekers, then why are people still unemployed? Well, some of that is due to what economists call mismatch, which is the disconnect between what employers want and what job seekers want or are capable of. Essentially, though, what it boils down to is that just because the jobs are out there doesn't mean landing the right job is always easy to do. The most important tool you have to help you get that perfect job is your resume. I always like to stress that a fantastic resume is not going to get you a job. Employers don't hire resumes alone, but your resume still has enormous power because it can enhance or impede your ability to land an interview. And that's what's going to get you that job. A single job posting can potentially garner hundreds of responses. The actual numbers vary a great deal across industries. For example, a job in the hospitality industry may attract 50 applicants, while a Union Pacific Railroad job can receive hundreds in the first couple days. But the average in business and in general is about 250. So that means employers will potentially receive hundreds of resumes, and they typically interview fewer than 10 applicants. And of course, they can only hire one person. Your resume is what's going to get you from that applicant pool into that interview room. If you're familiar with the term elevator pitch, you know that it refers to a sales pitch of sorts. It's a brief, maybe 30-second opportunity to introduce yourself or get a great point across, basically in the time it would take you to ride an elevator with someone. Think of your resume as a written elevator pitch. You want the employer to read your resume and say, yep, this could be the one. I need to learn more. This is your opportunity to put your best foot forward, make a great first impression, pique the company's interest, impress a hiring manager, and most importantly, get you the opportunity to prove that you're the right candidate for the job by getting you into an interview. But with great power comes great responsibility. The applicant tracking system was designed for huge companies that were inundated with just too many applications to go through. So, although part of what it does is track applicants, as its name suggests, the primary function is really to evaluate, rate, and then ultimately eliminate applicants. Often 75% or more of resumes will be filtered out before they even reach a hiring manager's desk. It's not enough to just be qualified for a position. You also need to have a resume that can make it through that gauntlet. Currently, 99% of Fortune 500 companies or higher use ATS software. And although historically it's been much more common at larger companies, with the prevalence of online applications, it's now also widely used at mid-sized and even small-sized companies. Today, we're going to talk about some specific ways to create an ATS-friendly resume. Before you start submitting, and actually before you even start writing your resume, you need to consider what kind of resume you're writing. What are your professional goals? Are you looking for advancement in your organization, better opportunities within your industry, but at a new organization? Are you doing a career transition or a military crossover? The career goals that you have should directly inform what your resume looks like and how it's structured. If you're seeking advancement within your organization, maybe that's a management position, some other type of promotion or a raise, even. Maybe you've recently completed a higher level degree or a certification or a professional milestone like tenure. For this situation, you'll want your resume to lean most heavily on your work experience at your current organization. That doesn't mean leave off previous experience altogether, but this resume isn't a first impression. And you really want to make sure that you focus on reminding them of the value that you have brought and will continue to bring to your organization. If you're not employed and looking for a job, or if you are employed but seeking new opportunities outside your organization, then your resume is going to be slightly different. You want to focus on giving the employer a full picture of your qualifications and work history, education, certifications, because this employer doesn't know you. This resume is your first impression. Make sure you showcase as many standout achievements as you can and include all relevant skills for the new position in your work experience summary. A career transition is a very specific type of resume because you need to translate your previous experience into relevant skills in a new field. And we talked a lot about translation of skills in our previous webinar. So if you did miss that one or if you need a refresh, please feel free to go back and revisit that. It's got a lot of information on how to translate relevant skills to a career transition resume. Because the goal here is to show that even though your previous experience isn't in the same field, you have picked up all the skills, education, and qualifications you need to successfully make this change. 65% of employers have reported a preference toward candidates with relevant work experience. So your career transition resume really needs to bridge that gap and keep you competitive. Make sure you showcase your most relevant skills at the very top of your resume. So if that's a recent degree, then you'll want to put education above work experience. The employer needs to see at a glance, at first glance, that you have the necessary qualifications for this position. And if that means you need to reorganize some of the sections of your resume, then that is absolutely what you should do here. And most importantly, avoid putting industry specific detail in your previous work experience. Focus on standout achievements, universally applicable skills. You need to translate your resume into the language of your new intended industry. Make sure you describe the value you will bring in terms that the new organization will understand. A military crossover resume is kind of the ultimate career transition resume, and they can be challenging. Military resumes need to be written very similarly to career transition resumes, but the translation of those skills can be a lot trickier. Some common mistakes that are made on military resumes are the use of acronyms and military jargon. And it's also crucial when writing a military resume to show clear and focused career goals within the civilian workforce. When you're writing your civilian resume, you need to draw on your military experience in a way that's visibly relevant to the position for which you're applying. And not all your military experience is going to be relevant. So just be very thoughtfully selective when you're constructing this resume. And it's important to stick to the industry standards for resume length. Unless you're writing a federal resume, you should not exceed 2 pages. Now, every resume is different, every job seeker is different, and every resume is unique. But there are some things that can be applied to all resumes, no matter what type of job you're looking for. If your resume is professional looking with a clean, appropriate format, you can ensure that an employer will take time to read it. Using strong, powerful verbs to describe your professional experience and achievements will give your credentials the weight they need to make an impression. Selecting key words from the job description shows you meet the requirements of the position. Using active strategic language will set you apart from other applicants. Resume length is very important. Typically, there are very few reasons a resume should ever be longer than 2 pages. But nothing will undermine your chances of employment faster than a poorly written resume. Over 40% of resumes will be tossed for being poorly written. Ensure that there are 0 spelling and grammar errors before submitting your resume. We tend to focus a lot on content when it comes to the ATS and what it's looking for, but there are some formatting elements to be aware of also. When putting your contact block at the top, do not put it into a header. The ATS won't be able to parse the data in a header, and you don't want to risk being screened out simply because the system couldn't pull your contact information. This will also help you when it comes to the online application portion, parsing your basic information, and then you won't have to duplicate that either. At the top, a simple block with your name, city, state, phone number, email address, and LinkedIn address. If you have multiple phone numbers or email addresses, use only one each. There's no reason to put multiple lines or emails. Designate one phone number and one email address as your job search ones, and that will not only keep your resume looking clean, but also help you track your applications and contacts with companies. The title in your resume isn't a requirement, but it's nice to have. And if you're going to put one there, just ensure that it speaks to the job for which you're applying. The summary should be a few sentences, not a long paragraph. And it should be written in resume language. You want to keep the language of your resume consistent throughout. And we'll talk more about resume language in a bit. Also, try to emphasize the qualifications that you have for the position in the summary. This is one section that should really consider tweaking and customizing for each targeted position. The same goes for the qualifications section. You can call it key qualifications, core competencies, whatever title you want to use for that section. Just be sure you hit all those keywords and skills from the job posting in there. And don't just slap them on there and forget about them. The ATS is scoring your resume based on the presence of qualifications, skills, and experience. So be sure to repeat those keywords throughout the content of your resume when you're talking about your previous work experience. Your best bet for most job positions is going to be a hybrid resume. This is one that combines a brief summary of your previous work history along with bullet points highlighting standout functions or achievements. Quantifiable achievements are great to have here. If you can show measurable contributions, that's fantastic. If not, just be sure to use language that articulates your contributions in an easily interpreted way. Your work history should be in chronological order with your most recent or current position at the top, and then you're going to go backwards from there. You also want to make it clean and easy to read. If your resume looks more like an essay than a resume, it's unlikely to be read. Employers are looking for a quick, easy scan to just check for the necessary credentials and qualifications, anything that makes you stand out as a candidate. The average first look at a resume is literally seconds. So they need to be able to easily identify what they're looking for. Be sure to include all the important information and anything that really speaks to your achievements and make it easy to find. And then when it comes to your daily, more mundane stuff, you can be much, much less detailed. And there's no reason to include implied tasks. An implied task is anything that's inherently part of the position that's common knowledge that you do every day. For example, if your position involves maintaining records, you don't have to mention that you do filing every day. It is understood that if you are maintaining and managing records, you're also filing them. A great rule of thumb is to balance your resume against the job posting. If it's not a major responsibility, a standout achievement, or a task that's specifically mentioned in the job posting, then you can probably omit it. The most important content of your resume are going to be those key skills that are listed in job posting. Keywords are ones that are mentioned in a job posting as required and preferred. These are the skills, certifications, and experience that the employer views as their top priority, which means those are the skills, certifications, and experience that you need to showcase in your resume. Check the job posting. Keep an eye out for specific skills that stand out, particularly ones that are repeated more than once, anything that's listed as required. Often, the way the ATS filters resumes is to score applicants based on how well their resume aligns with the priorities set by the company. So, if you see the word Excel proficiency repeated multiple times in a job posting, or if it's listed as one of the top required skills, then you can bet it's going to be a key factor in your resume score. And again, don't just drop the keywords once and forget about them. Make sure your resume clearly reflects the key skills and words in your experience. Keywords aren't just great for your resume, they can also be used to evaluate your qualifications for a particular job on your end. If there are key skills that you know you don't have, you may want to go for a different position instead. Some job search platforms like Indeed will actually help you with this. Before you apply, you'll receive a little pop up that says, hey, you may be missing a requirement for this position. And then you'll have the option to proceed with that application or move on to another one. And LinkedIn will actually give you job suggestions based on the skills listed in your profile. But you can have too much of a good thing. As important as keywords are, make sure you use them purposefully. You want to avoid what I call keyword salad, or as recruiters often call it, keyword stuffing. When you identify the keywords in a job posting, just list them in a bunch of places over and over again. Remember that your resume has to get through the ATS and the keywords will get you there, but then it will eventually be looked at by a hiring manager and it needs to read well. Use keywords throughout the body of your resume within the context of experience or expertise using that skill or technology. Certifications are also a really great way to showcase your expertise. And if you're proficient or expert level in a particular skill, be sure to specify that as applicable. Your entire resume should be written in resume language. That means you won't use any pronouns at all. You'll begin each sentence with a verb. For previous jobs, all your verbs should be in the past tense. And for your current one, you'll use present tense to describe current duties and responsibilities, and of course, past tense to describe previous projects or achievements. Resume language should be succinct, so avoid the use of a lot of unnecessary words. Thomas Jefferson once said, the most valuable of all talents is to never use two words when one will do. And I'm pretty sure he was talking about resume writing. The more filler words and embellishment words you use, the longer it will take the employer to scan the resume and the harder it will be to find what they're looking for. So keep it simple, make it easy for them to read and easy for them to realize what a great candidate you are. When talking about doer versus achiever, we're really talking about bringing added value to the organization. As an employee, do you just show up, do the job, and go home? And to be honest, technically, there's nothing really wrong with that. After all, it is what you're paid to do. But when it comes to the hiring process, it's all about presenting yourself as the type of person who will go above and beyond for the organization, the type of employee who exceeds expectations. That's what makes you a competitive candidate. All other basic required skills and experiences being equal, what is it about you that makes you more valuable than the other candidates the employer is considering? That's the picture you want to paint with your resume. And the way you do that is by using power verbs. Power verbs are just regular verbs in superhero clothes. Did you pass your test or did you ace it? We want to elicit a wow response, not an, okay, that sounds cool. If I told you I attended this event as the company's representative and I gave a presentation, you might say, oh, that's cool. That sounds like fun. But if I told you I was selected to represent my organization as a key presenter at the annual XYZ Summit for an audience of 350 strategic industry partners, then you might give me a little more of a wow, right? Use a thesaurus, use a grammar help site, take a little more time and attention when it comes to your sentence structure and your word choice, and give weight to your achievements. Don't dilute them. Screen out factors are things that are likely to get your resume bumped from the candidate pool. So if you have any of these, it's critical to address them and do what you can to minimize their impact. There are two different times you need to be concerned about screen out factors. The first is during that ATS scan, and then the second is during the initial scan from the employers. ATS software is customized, so it's important to look through the job posting to determine if you meet the minimum qualifications. For example, if the posting requires a master's degree and you only have a bachelor's, that's likely something they're scanning for. So if you don't meet that criterion, your resume is unlikely to make it through to the hiring team. But not all filtering criteria is based on minimum requirements. So there are some things you can do to ensure you're not being filtered for those reasons. Being unemployed for 27 or more weeks reduces your probability of receiving a job offer by 12.5% compared to being unemployed for 5 weeks. If you have a gap within a single calendar year, try changing the month-year format to just years. If you just finished school and you haven't been working during that time, consider developing your education as an experience block to fill that gap. And then you can address it in more detail in your cover letter. If you've had 2 or more jobs within the same calendar year, you want to select the most relevant and omit the others to avoid having overlapping dates. You'll still have to include all of this information in your application, but this way it doesn't negatively impact your resume. The person looking at your resume has likely looked at dozens, if not more, just for this one position. And who knows how many for previous positions. So they know what they're looking for and they do it very quickly. This means that after you make it past the ATS, you then need to make it past an initial scan from the employer. They're going to scan through your resume for a matter of seconds. If they don't see any red flags and they do see the basic minimum requirements they're looking for, then your resume will get a second look. The first screening is all about what the employer is looking for. So you also need to be aware of some implicit or unconscious biases. There are some things on your resume that may incorrectly suggest to the employer that you may be difficult to manage or unreliable or not focused. So things like changing owner founder to a more functional title, something related to the position you're applying for, using the term freelance instead of self-employed. If you have more than 5 to 7 positions, leave off the older or irrelevant ones to avoid the appearance of job hopping. Just remember that the point of mitigating screen out factors is never to lie about your experience. It's to get you through the filtering process and into an interview where you have the chance to explain in more detail and prove that you're the right candidate for the job. There are many places where biases creep into the hiring process. Employers are all human and, as such, all prone to implicit and unconscious bias. This can have a detrimental impact on your job search as well. Some of the language in a job posting might be a subtle deterrent from you even wanting to apply. A 43-year-old single mom may not want to apply for a job that says that the company is looking for a digital native to work in a startup culture. Look for clues in the job posting. The language used can be very telling. Once you can identify any potential biases in the job description, then you can decide for yourself if you still want to apply. The right job may be well worth it. Now, you may have to navigate the waters of bias in the hiring process, and unfortunately, you can't change that, but you can be prepared to combat it. One very prevalent type of bias in today's multi-generational workforce is ageism. Especially with the current rates of career transition, ageism can be found at all stages of employment, from the vetting of a resume to the laying off of personnel. 76% of older employees reported age discrimination as an obstacle to finding a job, and recent hiring bias statistics show that more than 50% of older workers were terminated or laid off due to their age. Recent research shows that although 64% of CEOs have reported diversity and inclusion initiatives, a mere 8% even include age as part of that effort. Just like there are subtle things that reveal an employer's potential age bias, there are some subtle things you can do to neutralize that bias and get an interview. Your email address handle can reveal a lot about you. An older email address handle can show your age or even suggest that you're slow to catch up on technology. The worst one you can use is AOL, followed closely by Hotmail and Yahoo. So Gmail is always going to be your best friend for job applications. If you don't have one, create a LinkedIn account and add it to your profile, to your resume. Professional networking is a huge part of the job seeking process. Finally, don't put any employment history older than about 15 years, 10 to 15 years, and remove any dates that might reveal your age. And this includes dates of certifications or education, graduation, anything that could suggest that you're an older employee. Seeking employment in the digital age comes with a lot of unique challenges, and among them is your digital footprint. Once upon a time, an employer had to rely on your resume, interview, and references to determine if you were the best candidate for a position. That is no longer the case. Your first impression can be made without you even being present. Employers, or really anyone, can find tons of information about you just with a simple internet search. Some of that can be helpful, but others not so much. And the worst part is we often put that information out there ourselves without even considering the long-term impact it will have. Part of preparing for a job search in this environment includes preparing your digital footprint. 90% of recruiters and employers will check a candidate's social media prior to extending prior to extending an offer or even an invitation to an interview. This includes professional networking sites such as LinkedIn, as well as others. You really want to take back control of your digital footprint and make sure it represents you in a positive way. Mistakes on your resume can cost you the job you want. But the great news is that most common mistakes people make on a resume are completely avoidable. A top resume survey of recruiters reported that 80% view spelling and grammatical errors as resume deal breakers. And yet, over 50% of resumes contain them. If you put your resume through multiple rounds of revision before submitting it, you can eliminate those errors. Using elaborate designs, formats, templates, and the inclusion of a photo is another major resume mistake. Keep it clean, professional, make the content of your resume speak for itself. Other preventable mistakes include unprofessional email addresses, missing contact information, and formatting issues. For the formatting, try holding your resume further away, even pinning it to a wall. Look at it from a distance that you can't really read the words and just evaluate its overall appearance. Is the spacing consistent throughout, or does it have some spots that look squished and then a big blank space over here? Are the margins even? Are the font sizes consistent? Does it have large sections of lengthy text that look like somebody's not going to take the time to read it? These are all things that are easier to identify when you're not distracted by reading the words. So make sure you're looking at that from a distance so you can get that perspective. And once your resume is ready, then we can move on to the cover letter. I know writing a cover letter is nobody's favorite thing. It can be a little tedious, but if there is an option to include a cover letter, 100% of the time you should include one. Think of it this way. Let's say the resume is required and the cover letter is option, as is usually the case with most job postings. You elect to attach your resume, but do not include a cover letter. Now, after all that work, you went to show through your resume that you are an overachiever, an achiever and not a doer. Your very first impression for the employer is that you're the type of person who does only what's required and nothing more. That is exactly the opposite of what you want them to think. And the numbers speak for themselves. Including a cover letter can increase your chances of being hired by 40%. And if that's not enough, think of your cover letter as the opportunity to address anything in your resume that you might be concerned about. Things like employment gaps, shorter term positions, and most importantly, a career transition. If you're doing a career transition, the cover letter is your best friend. This is where you show the employer how prepared and enthusiastic you are to be entering this exciting new field. You want your resume and cover letter to look like a beautiful curated set. Not you downloaded one template from this website and one template from another website and slapped it all together to apply for the job. These documents should be in the same format, using the same fonts and structure, and they should read as two elements of a professional portfolio. You want to keep the margins and spacing as standard as possible on your cover letter, and you want the letter to sit nicely on the page. What I mean by that is, like the resume, it shouldn't look like an essay. You want to be detailed, but you also want the employer to take the time to read it. 3 paragraphs is absolutely ideal for your cover letter. And it's also okay to include bullet points. If you have a specific list of skills or qualifications that you want to highlight, not too many bullet points, no more than 3 to 5, but the right bullets can certainly enhance a cover letter. And like the resume, you want your cover letter to be succinct yet powerful. But unlike the resume, your cover letter should be written in the first person. The cover letter is your opportunity to step outside the confines of the structure of your resume. Your cover letter should be even more targeted than the resume. Here is where you put that pivotal information you have to share with the employer because it's going to convince them beyond the shadow of a doubt that you need to be interviewed. This is where you can say things like, in addition to my professional qualifications, I also have 300 hours of volunteering in xyz.org, which is one of your organization's charitable affiliates. Or in preparation for my transition to the nature preservation field, I've done extensive research and study on the migration patterns of bald eagles, as well as habitat restoration and noxious weed control. The content of your cover letter should be entirely professional unless there's something personal that directly relates to the position. For example, you're applying for that job at that nature preserve and you are a lifelong advocate of conservation and preservation of natural habitats. That is appropriate to mention. But personal information such as marital status, children, family, religious affiliation, none of that should be included. Basically, the cover letter's job is to enhance the content of your resume and ensure that you get that call to schedule the interview. Here are just a few last tips before you get started on your resume. No pictures. Resumes with photos have a rejection rate of 90%. Unless you're going to be a graphic designer, there's also no need for fancy graphics on your resume. And I really recommend all black, but if you absolutely must add color, make sure you're using one color and it's professional. something like a green or a blue, maybe even gold, but not, fluorescent magenta. And use it only as a subtle highlight, not an overpowering part of the resume. You want to avoid tables and graphs in your resume. Most ATS software will not be able to properly read the data in a table or a graph. That means if you have tons of relevant skills and keywords in the table, you lose all that weight to your resume in the translation. Do not put references on your resume. That is not a professional qualification, and that includes the references available upon request line at the bottom. If the company wants references, they will let you know. And in the meantime, none of that needs to be on your resume. Be consistent in your formatting. Use the same date formatting for all your employment blocks and the same bullet formatting throughout. So if you're doing month year, every job should be month year. If you put punctuation at the end of one bullet, then every bullet in your resume should have punctuation. Be mindful of your document file name. If you are attaching your resume as a file, which is usually the case, the employer can see the file name. So if your resume is called resume version 2036 or resume employer's name, it may look unprofessional. The resume should have your first name and your last name and the word resume. So Rachel Eckman resume underscore Rachel Eckman, Rachel underscore Eckman underscore resume. You get the idea. First name, last name, resume. Those are the only words that need to appear in the title. And of course, be sure you're uploading the correct file type. Nearly half of resumes are submitted in the wrong file type and then can't even be read by the ATS. Most applications will tell you what types of documents are compatible with the software, and often they won't even allow you to upload the wrong type of document, but that's not always the case. So be mindful of this. Check, but if there's no specific file type mentioned, it's probably a good idea to stick with a Word document. That gives you the best chance of compatibility. And most importantly, just take the time to get your resume polished before you submit it, and then get ready for those interviews. Next week, on our final part of the career series, we will be talking in detail about some of the application process and most importantly about how to prepare for a fantastic job interview. So hopefully we will see you all again next week. And in the meantime, I will pass it back to Maxine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And I can already see that we have some really great questions coming in. So I'm going to keep this part a little bit short so we can get to those questions. Like I mentioned, there is going to be a follow-up email sent out in the next day or so that will have a link to the recording of this webinar. So you'll be able to go through, listen to everything that Rachel has said in the past, and kind of help tailor your resume moving forward. Additionally, on your screen, as you can see, these are the links to our different social medias. We highly recommend you follow us on our social medias. Just that way, next time we have a career-focused webinar series coming up, you'll be able to see that information ahead of time. And then our YouTube channel, this is where I mentioned you can view all of our previous webinar content. If you just go to tutor.com/YouTube webinars, that will bring you right on over there, so that we can go ahead and so that you can go ahead and view that. But with all that said, Rachel, there were some great questions that came in. Someone asked, can you share some more information about how someone might use education to help fill an employment gap on a resume to remain in the application pool?
Absolutely, that is a great question. I like to remind people that when you are a full-time student, think about that word full-time, because being a full-time student is workload wise very, very similar to being a full-time employee. So what you can do is, first of all, you'd list it just exactly in the same way as you would list an employment block, except that instead of an organization that you're working for, you put the college or whatever institution of education that you are attending, and then of course your job title would be student. And then what you want to do is you want to go through the the synopsis of your major. So let's say, for example, you are majoring in psychology, and now you're going for your first position as an intern or an associate at a psychology, organization. So what you want to do is you want to put the basic description of your major, of your focus, of all of the things, the elements in your degree that really fully apply to the job that you're applying for. And then your bullets, you develop things like, you made dean's list for 5 out of 6 semesters, or you graduated summa cum laude with a 4.0 GPA. You were published in a peer-reviewed journal for your thesis. Things of that nature. So basically, step outside the lens of students and look at your time as a student as if it were a job. That's the most important element, is changing your mindset. Instead of looking at it as, I was in school for 4 years and oh my gosh, it was the longest 4 years. Look at it as if you were working at the college for 4 years, and then write down all your achievements, all of your qualifications that you accrued. If you were able to get any certifications in conjunction with your education, those are fantastic things to put as well. If you did an internship, or if you did some kind of workforce experience while you were doing your degree, if you had practicums, if you just finished a master's degree and you did a practicum at an organization, make sure you're developing that as part of your previous experience block. And basically, it will not just get you through the ATS. That's the main thing, right? You want to get rid of that employment gap, and you want to get through the ATS in that way. But not only that, but it will also showcase to an employer the level of seriousness with which you view your recently completed educational experience, which is a fantastic thing to showcase also.
All right. So we do have another question that is kind of talking about college experience, which I'm going to get to in a second. I did see someone asking about the resume formats that we kind of showed off in this webinar. Again, there is going to be a recording that's sent out, so you'll be able to kind of skip through it and see all the different portions of the resume that Rachel has shown off. So if you were interested in those different types of formats, keep an eye out for that email going out in the next day or so. But to bring it back to that last question, someone was asking about kind of how to build a good resume when you don't have much work experience, you're freshly out of college, and you're trying to apply to your first major job. So how do you kind of go about writing a resume for that?
That is another really great question. And really, the thing that I find with most recent college grads who don't have a ton of work experience is that a one-page resume will work really well for you. So don't feel pressured to try to get your resume to extend to that second page. Two-page resumes are fantastic if you have the experience that requires it, but there's nothing wrong with a one-page resume. So you've got a really strong portfolio of educational stuff to rely on. And make sure you focus on the currency of all your educational elements. If you have any current certifications, if you have any really recent relevant coursework, that's something that works really, really well for a recent grad resume. So focus on the relevant coursework within your educational experience that applies directly to the position for which you're applying. And then also be sure, again, to include any kind of extracurricular stuff that could be work oriented. And so if you were in, a football club, that's more likely than not going to really apply to whatever it is that you're seeking, unless you're, drafting for the NFL. But if there was something that you did, a model congress, or, some kind of an advocacy group, those are things that you can include on your resume as well, to include that sort of professional experience summary in your time in college. So don't be afraid to lean on things that may not have been paid employment, but anything where you garnered real life working style experience can be included on a recent grad resume. And the other thing, again, is the cover letter is going to be your best friend here. So the cover letter is where you're going to say to the employer, I am a recent grad and I am just so excited and ready to jump right in with both feet. And I have gotten all of this great education and I just can't wait to use it and apply it hands on at your organization. So be sure that your cover letter complements your resume with the enthusiasm and energy of a recent grad who's ready to just come out strong into the workforce.
Okay. Before we get to the next question, which I see two kind of talking about ageism, there was somebody asking about registering for next week's tutorial on interviewing. That information will be in that follow-up email. So again, just keep an eye out for that, and you'll be able to sign up for upcoming any upcoming webinars. And again, in that follow-up email, there will be a recording of this video for you to view. Now, Rachel, someone was asking, how would you prevent ageism if an unofficial transcript is asked for or information about your education history? Would you black out the dates or redact the transcript, or how would you kind of go about that?
Unfortunately, that is it. That is I don't want to say, that company is trying to weed out older employees, but when it comes to asking for transcripts or for diplomas, there's really kind of no way to avoid the dates there. I think the most important part when you're going for something like that is if your degree is more than, for example, like 10 years old, just include somewhere within that process, whether it's in your cover letter or whether it's in conjunction with, whatever email you're sending to provide those materials, or somewhere in the job application process, or in conversation with a recruiter or with a hiring manager, mention someplace currency in your knowledge and skills. So don't just say, here's my degree that I finished 20 years ago. Say, here's my degree that I finished 20 years ago, and a list of recent, journal articles that I've read, certification refresher courses that I've taken, certain podcasts or newsreels that I've been following. So in other words, you can't hide the dates, right? If they want official documents and the official documents have dates, there's nothing you can do about that. But what you can do is supplement the dates with information on how you've worked to stay current and stay on top of trends and changes that have occurred in that field in the last however long it's been since you got that education.
All right. It looks like we have time for maybe two more questions. So one question was about kind of maybe formatting your resume, where, for example, let's say you were a teacher, then you moved to another field, and now you're thinking about moving back to like the teaching field. How would you format that if your most recent position isn't related to the job you're looking to get?
That is a great question. And fortunately, it's a really easy answer. Just it's a career transition resume. However, you have this benefit of all of this prior experience in that field. So, although you're transitioning back from an outside industry or field, you're bringing back with you not only all your previous experience as a teacher, but you've also, by the way, got all this great outside experience now that will complement, and I would even say, go ahead and steal that line, to complement all your previous teaching experience. And so that's something that I would put in two places. I would put that in the summary section of your resume and also in your cover letter, and make sure you reiterate in both places, you have, not only are you a seasoned and expert teacher with all of this previous experience, but you've also branched out and taken with you the perspective of all this outside information that you want to now bring back in and use as tools to enhance your teaching capabilities. That's a really fun resume to write, actually. That one should flow for you really well.
All right. And then for our final one, it's actually slightly different than a lot of the resume and the ATS stuff that we're talking about. But I believe it's kind of talking about maybe when you're going in for that interview or handing in a resume in person, what your recommendation is on paper stocks, if you should use just plain white paper or something that's slightly colored, and what your thoughts on that are.
No to both. No plain white paper and no color. So if you go to any office supply store, I don't have any stock in any office supply stores, Office Depot, Office Max, Staples, wherever you want to go, Michael's, I believe even, or Hobby Lobby, any of those places that has paper, you will find resume paper. And it's in the paper aisle, but it's in its own box, and it has right on there in bold resume paper. And there are different weights, and you don't have to buy the most expensive. But if you're handing in a resume in person, I always recommend getting a nice stock of resume paper. What, I don't know the weights off the top of my head, but I, just to give you as an example, when I used to work with my students and helping them write their resumes, I would have just boxes and boxes of resume paper, and I would make them print off 5 or 6 copies of their resumes on resume paper, so they never had to hand in just plain printer paper. That said, if you want to go with an off-white, that would be great. Even if you want to do like a very, 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 very light tan, but nothing else. No shades of green or blue or pink, just white, off-white, nice little resume stock, just something that has a little more nice feel to it than just a regular sheet of printer paper.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Again, it looks like that's kind of coming up on time. I did see a couple more folks ask in the chat again if there's going to be a link to the recording when we're done. There will be in a follow-up email. You will get a recording for this webinar, as well as a link to the upcoming webinar that you can use to sign up. And additionally, if you want to look at any of our previous webinars, so for example, last week when we were talking about career transitions, you can go to our YouTube page, which you can see on our screen right here, tutor.com/YouTube webinars. And all of our previous webinars are going to be there. So you'll have a wealth of information and content to look over. But again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today for this webinar. We really hope that you found some of this information helpful. And again, thank you so much, Rachel, for coming, presenting, and sharing your expertise in this field. All right, and have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody.
Thanks, Maxine. Thanks, everyone.